Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to pick up on an article I came across which described the border checkpoints that it says would be necessary in the event of an independent Scotland joining the EU, which is going to be a big issue to sort out come the next independence campaign. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So usual disclosure at the beginning here. As you may notice, I'm not Scottish. So when I talk about Scottish independence, just be really clear. I personally don't think it's a good idea, but at the same time, I am also of the firm view that there is clearly a mandate for another Scottish independence referendum, and furthermore, that it should not be for Westminster to approve or disapprove of it. Because we're going to get into this one now, because normally when you discuss Brexit with Scottish independence, or at least a Scottish independence referendum, you talk about it in the context that Brexit has made Scottish independence more likely. This is the other way around, and it's going to be full of convoluted twists and turns of time travel, like the maddest Doctor Who story you've ever seen. This is what I would call the Schrodinger's Brexit of Scottish independence, because even without Brexit, the rise of the SNP in both the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish seats in Westminster has been raising for some time now the very credible prospect of the UK being no more in the foreseeable future. You know, if Scotland eventually votes for independence, that will be that. Polls shift one way, then they shift the other. It's fairly finely balanced either way, but then so was Brexit with huge consequences. It's impossible to say what the result would be if there were another referendum, because there'd be another campaign and then it's dependent upon which side runs the most effective campaign. But we can worry about that another time. Here I'm going to be talking about the Brexit consequences of such a move. A report has been produced by UK Interchange in Europe, which is a think tank on the UK's relationship with Europe, really. It talks about the borders that would need to be erected between Scotland and England should Scotland become independent and then join the EU, which of course is the plan. And sure enough, if you think of a future where England and Wales continue to go down the hard Brexit path that we are currently treading, and Scotland is part of the EU, obviously the border infrastructure between Scotland and England will have to mirror that of, say, England and France, for example. But it's no good thinking of what an independent Scotland would have to do in order to join the EU as if comparing the situation within the UK as it is now. Because every step along the way takes time. And in that time, things will change in England and Wales as well. Could be changes for the better, could be changes for the worse. But it's impossible to consider the impact of Brexit and Scottish independence without considering the timeline along which it happens. So get the TARDIS fired up. The first thing that would have to happen, obviously, is Scotland would have to vote for independence. Now, as the SNP have not yet begun the process of initiating a referendum, much less testing the legal powers that they have, or that Westminster have, it's not been tested in the courts yet regarding the Scotland Act. This is still a good couple of years away, at least, shall we say. Second, Scotland would then have to leave the UK. That doesn't take place overnight. This isn't like kicking out a prime minister after a general election result. So you're talking a couple of years before a referendum, maybe. That seems to be what the SNP are thinking anyway. And then how long does it take to actually leave the UK? Look at how long it took for the UK to leave the EU, which was in theory a much more straightforward process. I'm not actually suggesting it would take that many years, but there are things that need to be sorted out, which neither Westminster nor Holyrood are addressing right now. Very much like Brexit, Scottish independence will largely worry about the practical implications only once the vote comes through, because at the moment it's a purely political affair. The logistics not even been talked about, and at least not, at a higher level. So what I'm basically saying is you are talking, 4 or 5 years from now, so to include the time to have the referendum and then the time to dissociate from the rest of the UK, good 4 or 5 years before we could be looking at an independent Scotland in all probability. And that's if it happens anytime soon at all. So then the third thing that would need to happen is that what remains of the UK, Wangland as Graham Hughes calls it, so why not, let's go with it, would still need to be dancing to the tune of the hard Brexiteers in the Conservative Party. That would mean that the Conservatives would have to have won the next election, but have been unable to block another referendum on Scottish independence. Again, big ifs there. The fourth thing that would need to happen is that Scotland joins the EU, and Wangland is still pursuing that hard Brexit path. Now, just as with separating the UK, joining the EU is not a quick process. First of all, that independent Scotland would actually have to make sure it can actually operate as an independent nation. The point it leaves the UK is pretty much the same as when the UK left the EU under hard Brexit conditions. It'll have no treaties around the world, so we'll have to arrange them to be copy-pasted like we did. I don't see any great problem with that in theory. It then needs to issue a referendum on joining the EU. Now, you would imagine that would be done fairly quickly, but then I say fairly quickly, that's still a good year at least. The process for actually joining is not quick though. So there'd need to be lots of preparation done to make sure that Scotland, as an EU member, could comply with all its obligations. And that includes the hard border with England that allows the integrity of the single market to be maintained. In fact, before Scotland joined the EU, it would need to have effectively joined the single market and customs union anyway as a major step towards full membership. And they couldn't join the single market without having that border infrastructure in place on their border, or at least enough of it to satisfy the EU. Now, you could argue that the infrastructure would be needed before joining the single market. After all, the reason for the borders are World Trade Organization rules, which apply to all countries. They're not specifically EU rules. An independent Scotland would be a different market to Wangland, so they'd need customs and standards borders and checks. However, as we've already seen from Brexit, this is a massive pain in the arse to actually achieve, as well as very costly. As such, it's likely that a Scotland about to become independent would want to sign a treaty with the rest of the UK to continue to remain in the same market. Wouldn't be ideal, because Scotland would be subject to Wangland rules without having a say in them, but countries who join the single market without being EU members do the same, and there are several that seem to be okay with it. It would also be temporary. But then the politics. So if Wangland is still, again, we're assuming here, and again, the longer down this rabbit hole we go, the less likely I think this is. But if Wangland is still in control of the nutters, who are still forging ahead with this hard Brexit and getting away with it somehow, then they might refuse to agree to such a treaty out of spite. They will certainly take such a treaty off the table during the referendum campaign as a way of warning Scottish voters of the consequences of leaving the UK, which can't be ignored. Scottish voters can look at the long game, of course, but at the moment of independence and under these conditions, Scotland would find itself in hard Brexit territory. So it can't fast-track entry into the single market because it needs the infrastructure in place, especially if the Conservatives do recover their poll ratings and persist with this hard Brexit. It's very likely that by this time, we will have diverged more from the EU. And because the Conservatives aren't happy with Brexit as it is now, they want more and more divergence. We see it all the time in the hard Brexit press from some Tory MPs. They're insisting on more and more divergence. When Johnson falls, it is likely to be something that they base their decision on who should lead the party next. Will you give us more divergence? So it would be especially imperative that Scotland can carry out all the necessary checks on Wangland imports. But it would take years to set this up. And the process can't really begin until Scotland's left the UK. And this is why I call it the Schrodinger's Brexit for Scottish independence. Because you have two outcomes. I mean, you could have any number of ones if you want to go into fine detail. But two major outcomes. And neither can be known until you open the box. The first general outcome is that Westminster continues to be run by the lunatics. This makes a vote in favour of Scottish independence more likely, but it makes the immediate aftermath more painful. Because before Scotland could join the single market, it would need to put in infrastructure to crush trade with its largest export partner, England, at the same time as having no formal treaties, allowing it to trade on favourable terms with major markets, and perhaps being punished by a spiteful Tory man-child in the same way that the Brexit tabloids keep falsely accusing the EU of right now. The second possible outcome is that we do finally break the Conservatives at the next election. We align more closely with the EU in conjunction with the general public seeing just how damaging Brexit has been. We set ourselves on the path towards re-entry to the single market at the very least, and hopefully much more in time. But the consequence of this is that it would make it easier for an independent Scotland to comply with single market rules, because the rest of Britain is much more closely aligned anyway. And by the time it all needs to happen, it might be that Wangland is also applying to join the EU, or at least the single market. So that makes the practical implications easier. But you could also argue it makes the urgency for Scotland to separate from the UK much less so. So arguably it makes it harder for a Scottish independence referendum to get the result that they would want, especially once the discussion gets on to how trade borders are managed in the years it would take between independence and being ready to join the single market, whilst having your only land border with a nation that is not. That makes a vote for independence less likely. And the first page proper of this report I referred to, which I'll put in the description below if you want to read it all yourself, it says, I quote, "Brexit has re-energised the campaign for Scottish independence, but it has made the practicalities of independence more complex." So this is how Brexit is actually, it's a double-edged sword for Scottish independence. I've yet to see any proposals for handling this, but I would suggest that if the SNP do not come up with the plan, they could get tripped up in the next referendum, you know, just like they did in the last one, where it turned out they hadn't actually thought about what they were going to do for money in an independent Scotland. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.